Anonymous types are a special type of runtime class that is generated basically on the fly. Normally, when you want to create a class that contains state information, you have to formally define the class by using the class keyword and supplying the properties. However, with anonymous types, you are able to generate classes on the fly, as I mentioned, without formally defining the type first. For instance, if I wanted to define a point class, I could create a class called point. I'll just do it in the same file here just to make life simple. Say class point, and then public double x get and set, and then I'll supply a y and a constructor. So it's a very simple class, and if I want to use it, then I can say point p1 equals new point 1 and 2. That's great. So I can use it. But what happens if I want to create a three-dimensional point, or maybe even a four-dimensional point? Then I would have to create different versions of this point class. However, I propose that what we can do is create a new variable. We'll use the var keyword because we don't have a data type that we're going to specify, and say var p2 is equal to new. I'm not going to say point this time. I'm just going to open up curly braces. And within the curly braces, I'm going to identify my properties that I wish to include in my anonymous type. Now, I can do a console write line, and using string interpolation, I can specify p2 dot, and you'll see all of the standard methods that are available because of the object inheritance, but also x and y because I supplied x and y. So then I can say x, comma, y. If I run this, you will see 1 and 2. So I basically created a point type on the fly. But what data type is it actually? Let's do a console write line. We'll supply p2 as the variable. And remember, it has this getType method because it does still derive from object. Let's run this again. You can see it is this really funky name, the angle braces f double underscore anonymous type 0 backwards tick 2, and then it contains two system int 32s. So this is the type that it created on the fly. If I create yet another anonymous type, such as person1 is equal to new last name equals Smith, first name equals Jane, and then I perform a similar operation, but this time supply per1, and let's use last name because that's in there, not y anymore, first name, and then we'll say, hey, what's person 1's data type? You can see now it's anonymous type 1 tick 2, and then it provides the two properties. We can also then create a three-dimensional point. Let's call it P3 this time, and we can utilize the properties from P2 like this. P2.x and P2.y, and then z equals 3. Notice here I didn't say x equals p2.x. I could have, but since I already provided a property name called x, it's going to just assume that's what I want to call the property in this type as well. And let's print out p3.x, p3.y, and p3.z. Now the interesting thing about these anonymous types is we absolutely require this var keyword because we don't know what the data type is at compile time or before compile time. The compiler figures out the type, and then you can see when we run this, here it is. And now notice this is a tick 3. Have you figured out what that number is for? Well, it's anonymous type 1 that has 3 properties. It has int, int, int. Remember, the name had 2 name strings, and the first point had 2 ints. So that's why they were 2s. That's why this is tick 3. One of the rules about using these anonymous types is that you can't change the values once they're set. So if I went per1 dot, I can see last name and first name, but as you look, it says get. So it's read-only. So I can't say last name equals Jones. That is just not allowed. If I needed to change it, I need to create a whole new anonymous object. So that's just flat out wrong. Why do we have this? Mostly it's to support advanced technologies such as LINQ, which allows you to query into databases and project new types on the fly. It's like when you use a select statement off a SQL database, you can say select star, and that's like returning all of the properties of a class. But you could also say select last name, comma, first name, and leave off all the rest of the properties if that's all you're interested in. So that would be a projected type. It is not the whole type itself, but just a subset. And that's really what this is used for, especially with LINQ, as I mentioned, and functional programming. Now, both of those topics are more advanced than we need to cover here, but that doesn't mean you can't make use of anonymous types as long as you use it sparingly. The one thing is, if you pass one of these variables to another method, it has to be interpreted as an object on the other side or as something called dynamic, both of which we're not going to cover now, because you would require for the object to hit the individual properties, you'd have to use reflection to figure out what the property names are before you could access them. With dynamic, it allows you to access the property names without first having to use reflection, but then everything is done in a late binding manner, which is slower than traditional early binding, which is what we're doing here, because right here it says p2.x. It knows there's an x because we generated this object in this method, therefore it has visibility or scope to it. So use anonymous types sparingly, maybe just to play with them for right now. Again, they're going to become much more important later on when you start working with LINQ and anonymous types being projected from some of the LINQ to SQL libraries or possibly even functional programming techniques.